Mountain Man Medical has comprehensive but compact trauma kits with name brand quality components. They also have discounts available for firearms instructors, teachers, veterans, and others. Please go check them out at get-asp.com/mountainman and thank them for sponsoring today's video.
You want the good news, you want the bad news? All right, the bad news is that we got to remediate because some of you suck. The good news is it doesn't hurt to remediate, okay? So let's talk about that. My standard of accuracy is 80%. So in this last drill, to score an 80% or better means that you could not miss more than 5 shots. No more than 5, all right? So if you miss more than 5, you're below an 80. And I need 80% of the class, which is 8 of you, to get 80% or better to jump right into the curriculum. Otherwise, we've got to tone it down and do a little remediation, which is what we're going to start with, all right? So as I watched you guys through the zeroing and through the skills test, there's a couple things that I observed. So we're going to go for the low-lying fruit first, the easy pickings, if you will. First is going to be stance. A lot of you are trying to shoot from more of a static stance, which is great, but your stance needs to exist for 2 purposes. Mobility and then stability as you're moving. That's it, right? So all I'm doing is I'm taking a snapshot of my movement stance and using it as my actual shooting stance. But this is actually designed around mobility, movement, right? So many of you are shooting from a very square range mentality, which is fine because that's what most everybody learns from and learns on. But we need to think about the end in mind. So that means that I'm thinking about moving, right? Because if I'm not moving, I'm probably not in a good position. So movement is life. So I want to see more effort put in our stance. And a good shooting stance, everybody's going to be a little bit different. But a good shooting stance is going to start with about shoulder width, and then it's going to have an offset stance. So that means that my right foot is going to be trailing slightly. How much depends on you. When I'm shooting my rifle and I'm aggressive with my shooting, I actually have a pretty decent offset stance, right? If I'm shooting my handgun, I still have an offset stance, but it's not as much, okay? Once I have my shoulder width and my offset stance, the most important thing you do is shift your body weight forward. And that, I would say, probably 80% of you were not doing that. 80% of you were actually kind of shooting from your heels, right? Toes are up off the ground. And that's going to cost you when it comes to recoil management. So I want to be shoulder width, offset stance, weight on my toes. And this is it. I'm basically equally distributed. Now I'm on my heels. See that slight push back, right? Now equally distributed, now on my toes. Just that little shift. I'm literally kind of like, I could feel my toes literally grabbing the ground. That right there is going to do wonders for your recoil management, okay? So that's our stance. Want to go for that right off the bat. As far as the gun mount is concerned, there are 2 extra points of contact I get when I'm shooting a rifle. I get the buttstock into my shoulder pocket, and then I get my cheek weld. So the buttstock is going to interface with me in 2 parts, shoulder pocket, cheek weld. When it comes to the shoulder pocket, you can go outboard, middle, inboard. All right, those of you that are wearing a plate carrier of some sort, you're going to have to make a choice. Like most of your guys' plate carriers are not going to allow for you to go inboard, and everybody else is okay. So you're going to have to go outboard. All right, and that puts it precariously on the shoulder joint. So we want to be real careful that we get it stuck in there nice and good because the propensity for it to slip off or slip is high. So middle is ideal, but if I can't do middle, inboard would be better. But your gear prevents that in some cases. The next thing we talk about is the height. So this is the toe, this is the heel of the buttstock, toe. I need to get the toe high in my buttstock or on my shoulder pocket. I don't want to bury it down in here because then I'm just going to have to drop my head down to look at the optic. I need to keep that toe high in my buttstock or high in my shoulder pocket, right? Once I can keep that high in my shoulder pocket, I'm able to move my head less. Okay, some of us have to still move our head no matter what. If you're using a magnified optic, you have to move your head to get in the eye box, right? If you don't get inside the eye box, you're So that means consistent placement of the cheek weld is key. For red dot shooters, I don't care. As long as I can see through the tube, I see my dot, I see the target, I'm good to go. All right, so that's one of the pros and cons scenarios that you have to think about, is that a subtle variation in my cheek weld potentially could cause me to not pick up the dot or not pick up my reticle as quickly as I want. Just be aware of that. Now, when it comes to the gun mount, there are a lot of different ways to hold this rifle, but we want to use a way that is biomechanically superior. So defining biomechanics means that I'm using the muscular structure of my body to do the work. Okay, so what that would look like is when I'm here in my shoulder pocket, I want to make sure that I'm gripping the gun. Now I use what's called a choked up grip. So I use pistol grips that still have this notch here, because what that allows me to do is sink my middle finger into it, and then my ring finger lays on top. It gives me this nice choked up grip and a camming effect on the pistol grip itself. Super powerful, right? Second, with my weak hand, how I interface with my weak hand is one in the manner that I can work my light. All right, so I don't roll my thumb over unless I'm gonna run with a touchpad on the side. I keep my thumb in line with my light, right? So that's gonna be something to consider if you're running a light. From here, what I'm doing is I wanna keep my elbows oriented at my toes. So my elbows are going to be oriented at my toes. When my elbows are pointed at my toes, I have the maximum amount of power that I can exert. All right, so I need, give me 2 mags. 2 mags from you. Thank you, sir. So does anybody know how much a single magazine weighs? Anybody? 1 pound. So what am I holding in my hand? All right, so here's a simple way to learn about biomechanics. There's a lot of people that want to shoot with a hand over grip like this. Now, did you see the magazine already shift in my hand? All right, I'm applying a pretty good amount of pressure here. When I do this and I rotate my elbow down, the power that I'm able to exert is immense. And the reason why we talk about that is that a lot of times people will watch things or see things and they'll think that works well. I'm not saying that it doesn't work well, but there's probably a little bit that you're not seeing. Some of the stuff that you're not seeing. Like for us, I've got to expend a tremendous amount of energy, get into the target. I've got to fight on target, and then I still have to expend a lot of energy to get off the target. Right now, and granted, in most of your settings, you're probably not going to have to deal with that, but I will tell you right now, trying to hold on a suspect freehand in a technique that's not very supportive is going to get old really fast. Imagine trying to hold actually on a target. Not holding at a ready, but actually holding on a target. And now imagine that shot having to be a critical shot, which pretty much every shot you take is a critical shot, right? So fatigue is an issue, and you have to mitigate fatigue as much as you possibly can. Using a technique that is more fatigue prone is just, in my opinion, silly, right?
That's a kind word.
I was being kind. I feel like I've ramped up a little bit. I need to tone it down a little. Anyhow, so keep that in mind. So my gun mount, when I have everything lined up well, should be such that I look pretty much just like this, right? My weight is on my toes. I've got my elbows pointing down. I got the toe nice and high in my buttstock. And the only thing I have to do is drop my head down just a smidge. Now, some of this is being corrected with higher mounts. If a higher mount works for you, great. That's awesome. I had no problems with that. My only issue is that I like to run the same mount height for both my red dots and for my variable powered optics. I don't like to have this kind of craziness where I'm like, where's my head going? If my head goes to the same point, regardless of what optic I'm running. Why? Because I'm retarded. All right? So, after I've got these little issues down, now we need to talk about the shooting component. Okay? Now I saw a couple things that, again, are easy to fix. One, trigger finger placement. A lot of you, like if you were looking at this trigger is nothing more than a lever, right? It's a lever. If you understand leverage, then you understand that to exert the greatest amount of leverage, where would I need to place my finger? At the end. The bottom. But most of you are putting your finger up closer to the top or in the middle. Move your finger down to the bottom. Okay? That's going to give you power. What it's also going to do is it's going to help move your finger away from the frame, the receiver. Some of you are rubbing the frame as you squeeze the trigger. When you rub that frame, you're exerting force that's pushing the rifle. Right? So move your finger off the trigger by getting it low and actually canting it out. Now, this is the tricky part. because a lot of times people get butthurt when we talk about trigger finger placement on the trigger itself, right? The tip, the pad, or the knuckle. Most of the time, people are always going to tell you, oh, you want to go with the tip or the pad. I'm here to tell you that you want to sink that finger in deep. You want to go all the way up to that first joint. You want to have power to move that trigger smoothly. Without power, you are forced to use excessive force, which generates sight movement before the round leaves the barrel. And that's bad, because that's going to shift your point of impact. Now, the last thing we talk about is, notice the orientation of the tip of my finger, right? It is at 90 degrees. This is important, because if it's at 90 degrees, I'm exerting force on the face of the trigger, which allows me to move the trigger straight to the rear, right? So if I see the tip of the finger pointing less than 90 degrees, what does that tell me?
Pushing.
That's right, I'm edging the trigger, pushing the rifle. If it's greater than 90 degrees, what am I doing? I'm edging the trigger, pulling the rifle. Both are bad. 90 degrees. Focus on that. You can keep that tip, that finger pointed at 90 degrees. I'm telling you, you're going to solve so many of your shooting errors. And to be honest, it's the simplest trigger error to fix. That right there. Because the hardest one is actually the movement of the trigger. So you guys are going to have to get in a little close to see this. Move in a little bit closer. All right, so we're going to work through the trigger's movement, trigger manipulation. So I've got everything positioned correctly, right? I'm at the low part, I got my pad, I'm pointed at 90 degrees. So here's what's going to happen. There are 3 steps, 3 stages to any trigger out here. You've got the slop, you've got the slack, and then you've got the squeeze. So slop, then there's slack, then there's squeeze. So whether or not you feel it doesn't matter. It's there. It's like when a tree falls in the wood, does it make a sound? Yes, whether you're there or not. So slop, slack, squeeze. Slop, slack, squeeze. Now, what we're going to start with is a dry fire drill where you guys are going to work at trying to experience the slop, the slack, and the squeeze. And the way we're going to do this is nice and easy. We're going to actually rotate the firearm so that I can look at my trigger finger. Right? Muzzle's going to be pointed at my target. I'm rotating the trigger. I'm rotating the rifle so I can watch my trigger. I can watch it this way, or I can watch it this way. But what I want is I want you to watch your trigger finger movement. Slop, slack, squeeze. Right, recock. Slop, slack, squeeze. You're going to do that for what we call a 2-minute drill. Right? 2 minutes of free practice. Just want you to feel that trigger. And then some of you are going to be like, oh my God, I never knew that was there. That's okay. That's why you're here. Right? Once we're done with that, we're going to start shooting. But we're going to start shooting using all this new stuff that we just applied or just learned. Right? So let's review. Start with your stance. Right? Shoulder width. Offset. Weight on my toes. My mount, my gun mount. Elbows down. I'm going to keep that toe high in my shoulder pocket. Get my cheek weld, make sure that I'm gripping the rifle and pulling it into my body. Okay, don't just hold the rifle, pull into your body, right? As far as the sights are concerned, we're going to start this drill at the 5-yard line, which means where do you need to aim?
1.5 inches high.
How?
1.5 to 2.
How much is the correct measurement?
Oh,
2.5. 2.5. Let's talk about that. So, what's the size of this dot? Anybody remember? 4 inches. So if I want to hit in the middle, in the black, where do I actually need to put my dot? Your dot is going to be about right here. That's where it needs to be. That's 2.5 inches above. We want to be precise, right? If I'm not using correct measurements, I'm never going to be precise. That's where I want to aim, okay? So we're going to go through this drill where I want you to do your dry fire practice on the trigger manipulation. Then we're going to do live fire. We're going to step back as we work through this drill. Your point of aim is never going to change. You're going to keep that same point of aim. Everything should be delivered inside the black dot. That's your standard, the black dot. Okay? All right, let's move out to the 5-yard line for our dry fire.